There are places where the land remembers more than the people do, where the soil holds a record of every drought, every flood, every wrong decision made in a hurry, and every right one made slowly. This story happened in western Tennessee, late October. The kind of morning where the fog sits so low in the creek bottoms, it looks like the earth is exhaling. The persimmons had gone soft on the branch. You could smell the sweetness of them rotting in the cool air. Somewhere in the distance, a combine was running. That low diesel hum that means somebody else's harvest is almost done. The man standing at the edge of his own property that morning was 71 years old. His left hand was missing the tip of its ring finger, lost to a PTO shaft 30 years back. He never talked about it. His name was Harlan Coe. He farmed 340 acres in Carroll County, the same ground his father had broken with a borrowed disc in 1951. The farmhouse was built in 1938, board and batten, painted white so many times the wood beneath had forgotten its original color. The barn was older than the house by 20 years and somehow sturdier. Harlan had been farming alone for 11 years, since his wife, Dottie, passed from a stroke in the middle of planting season. He didn't stop planting. He finished the field first, and then he went home and sat at the kitchen table for a long time. People who knew him said that was the most Harlan thing he had ever done. He finished the field first. He ran a cow-calf operation, 63 head of commercial Angus, and a small row crop rotation on the bottom ground. Corn, soybeans, a little winter wheat. He kept meticulous records in a series of black composition notebooks, the kind you buy at a drugstore for $1 and change. He had 47 of them, stacked on a shelf above the kitchen door, each one dated on the spine in his careful, old-school print. He had learned farming from his father, and his father had learned it from a man who came back from the Second World War with shaking hands and a need to grow things. There was no agricultural college in Harlan's education. What he had instead was observation, patience, and a deep, almost physical suspicion of anyone who arrived on his land driving a clean truck. He had debt. Who doesn't? A $47,000 operating note with First Agrarian Bank out of Jackson. Manageable. Until the interest rate adjustment came through in the spring, and then it wasn't. The man from Continental Trust Asset Management arrived on a Tuesday in mid-September. His name was Drew Calloway. He was maybe 38, with the kind of tan you get on a golf course rather than in a field. He wore a vest, not a work vest, a quilted vest over a button-down, and he carried a tablet computer instead of a clipboard. He had been brought in because Continental Trust had acquired First Agrarian's loan portfolio, and they were conducting what the letter called a routine asset review. He walked the property for 40 minutes. He photographed the equipment. Harlan's 2009 case IH7120 combine, the Kubota utility tractor, the aging grain bins out behind the barn. He tapped things into his tablet. He nodded a lot. At the end of the walk, he sat across from Harlan at the kitchen table and told him that based on comparable sales data in the region, the equipment and land assets were insufficient to justify the extension of the current note. A liquidation sale, he said, would be in everyone's interest. Harlan looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "Have you looked at what that combine actually runs?" Drew Calloway smiled the way people smile when they are already thinking about the next meeting. "We use standard valuation metrics," he said. "The numbers are the numbers." He left before noon. The persimmons rotted on. What Drew Calloway did not know, because he didn't ask, and because the tablet didn't have a column for it, was that Harlan Coe was a meticulous man. After the bank's man left, Harlan went to his shelf and pulled down the notebook from 2021. He sat at the table and read it for an hour. Then he pulled down 2019. Then 2022. He wasn't panicking. He was looking for something he already suspected. The first thing he found was in the maintenance logs he'd kept on the case IH7120. Continental Trust had valued it at $41,000, roughly standard for a 2009 model with high hours. But Harlan had, in 2020, replaced the feeder house entirely with a factory-rebuilt unit from a dealer in Dyersburg. The invoice was in the notebook, $14,200, parts and labor. He had also replaced the rotor drive belt system, the cleaning shoe auger, and had the hydraulics rebuilt by a certified case technician named Bill Pratt out of Humboldt. Total receipts in that folder: $22,600 in documented mechanical work over 4 years. The machine didn't run like a 2009. It ran like something younger. The second thing he found took 3 days. He walked every row of the bottom ground, 110 acres of it, with a soil probe he'd had since 1998, a simple stainless tube you push into the ground by hand. He pulled cores every 40 feet and laid them out on a piece of plywood in the barn. What he found was a soil profile that told a story Drew Calloway's tablet would never understand. 12 years of cover cropping, carefully managed organic matter, a cation exchange capacity that a university extension agent he'd had testing done in 2021 had called exceptional for this region. The test results were in the notebook. The bottom ground wasn't 340 acres of average West Tennessee soil. It was some of the most productively managed ground in Carroll County. The third thing was simpler. He called Bill Pratt. He asked Bill to write down, in plain language on his shop letterhead, exactly what condition the case IH was in when he'd last serviced it in August. Bill Pratt wrote one paragraph. It ended with the sentence, "In my professional opinion, this machine has a useful working life of at least 12 to 15 additional years with routine maintenance." Harlan folded that letter and put it in the front of the most recent notebook. The liquidation sale was scheduled for a Thursday in late October. Continental Trust had contracted an auction company out of Nashville. 2 men in matching polo shirts who arrived with a sound system, numbered paddles, and a printout of expected bids. The expected bid on the case IH 7120 was listed at $38,500. The bottom ground, offered as a separate parcel, was listed with a reserve of $1,850 per acre. 40 people came. Neighbors. A couple of equipment dealers. 2 men Harlan didn't recognize who stood near the back and watched everything. The Nashville men set up their podium near the grain bins and tested their microphones. Before the bidding started, Harlan asked to speak to the auction company's lead representative, a man named Gary Ferris. He didn't ask loudly. He walked over, waited until Gary had finished talking to someone else, and handed him a manila envelope. Inside was a copy of Bill Pratt's letter, the soil test results, the full maintenance log summary for the 7120, and a 2-page handwritten document Harlan had spent 2 evenings preparing, a side-by-side comparison of Continental Trust valuations against documented evidence for each major asset. Gary Ferris read it standing up. He read it twice. Then he walked away and made a phone call. The sale was paused for 31 minutes. When it resumed, the reserve on the bottom ground had been revised to $2,400 per acre. The opening bid on the 7120 was reset to $56,000. The room was quiet for a moment in a way that rooms in small towns get quiet. Not dramatically, but with a stillness that everyone feels and nobody mentions. The bottom ground sold for $2,610 per acre. The combined sold for $61,000. The total proceeds were $47,000 more than Continental Trust's original projections. Enough to retire the operating note entirely, with money remaining. Harlan Coe did not sell the farm. The bottom ground was purchased by a neighboring operation, the Dewey family, who had farmed adjacent acres for 30 years and had always wanted that parcel. They paid fair. They knew what they were buying because Harlan showed them the soil tests before the sale. They shook hands in the barn. He kept the house, the home 40, and the cow-calf operation. He downsized to 51 head. The Kubota stayed. He sold the 7120 to a young farmer in Gibson County who drove 3 hours to look at it, and another 3 hours back to think about it, and then called on a Sunday evening and said he'd take it. Word moved through Carroll County the way things move in small places, not as an announcement, but as something people mentioned while they were doing something else. Someone at the co-op, someone at the diesel pump. The detail that seemed to stick the one people kept returning to, was the 31-minute pause before the bidding. Nobody had ever seen that before. Harlan's neighbor, a woman named Paulette Marsh who had farmed next to him for 22 years, told me she asked him about it afterward. He shrugged and said he'd just written some things down. He still has 47 composition notebooks on the shelf above the kitchen door. There is a particular kind of knowledge that doesn't come from school or from a tablet computer or from comparable sales data in a regional market. It comes from being in the same place, paying attention for long enough that the place begins to tell you things. Harlan Coe had been paying attention to that ground for 46 years. He knew what the soil felt like when the organic matter was right. He knew the sound the 7120 made when the feeder house was running clean. He knew which 40 acres would hold water in a dry year and which ones would give it back. None of that was in any column on any form. The fog comes back every October to those creek bottoms in Carroll County. The persimmons go soft. Somewhere a combine runs its low, steady note across the distance. And if you know how to listen, if you have been there long enough to know the difference between a machine that is barely running and one that is running right, you can hear it. You can hear everything. If you have ever been the person in the room who knew something, who had the numbers, who had the evidence, who had spent years watching and writing it down, and been politely, professionally ignored by someone with a better shirt and a newer device, then you already know how this story felt before I finished telling it. This channel is for those people, for the ones who finish the field first, for the ones who keep the notebooks. Hit subscribe if you want to stay for the next one, and drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one of them. Some of the best stories I've ever told came from someone in the comments who said, "That reminds me of something that happened near here. Tell me where you are. I'm listening."